Most people think credit card debt is no big deal. Just pay it off eventually, right? But $1.252 trillion in total credit card balances says otherwise. The way these payments are structured, most people carrying a balance are walking into a financial trap that lasts decades. So today we're breaking down every type of debt, how they actually work, and why some are way more dangerous than you think. Starting with the one almost everyone has: credit card debt. The average credit card interest rate right now is 23.99% APR. That's not a penalty rate, that's the median, the normal one. And the average person carrying an unpaid balance owes $7,886. Sounds manageable until you look at how minimum payments work. Your minimum is typically 2% to 4% of your balance. Pay a little each month, chip away, done. But if you owe $10,000 at 24% APR and only make minimums, it takes over 28 years to pay off. You'll spend roughly $27,000 total on that original 10 grand. You bought your debt twice. And here's the kicker: just under 3% of balances are actually delinquent. Most people aren't defaulting. They're sitting there, making minimums, technically current, while interest quietly doubles what they owe. The credit card company doesn't need you to default. They need you to pay the minimum. That's the entire business model, but at least credit card debt only costs you money. Wait until you hear about the type of debt that costs you 30 years and $250,000 in interest alone: mortgage. Everyone calls a mortgage good debt, and sure, on paper it makes sense. You're building equity, you're investing in an asset, you're not throwing money away on rent. But here's the thing: nobody ever finishes that sentence. Nobody ever says what a mortgage actually costs you when you zoom out. The average American owes $250,200 on their mortgage. For millennials, that number jumps to $320,027, and the current 30-year fixed rate, 6.52%, sounds manageable until you do the math on a $300,000 loan. At that rate over 30 years, you're paying over $380,000 in interest alone. That's more than the house cost. You're essentially buying your home twice and handing one of them directly to the bank, and here's where it gets worse. For roughly the first 15 to 18 years of your mortgage, the majority of your monthly payment goes toward interest, not principal. You're barely chipping away at what you actually owe. It's like filling a bathtub with a teaspoon while someone else drains it with a garden hose. People love the forced savings argument, and fine, there's something to that. Renters don't build equity, but mortgage holders also pay property taxes, maintenance, insurance, and closing costs that renters never see. The rent versus buy debate isn't as simple as one builds wealth and the other doesn't. Sometimes renting and investing, the difference wins. Sometimes it doesn't. Depends on the market, the timeline, and whether your roof decides to collapse in year 3, but at least a mortgage builds something. Student loans, on the other hand, finance an asset that's already depreciating the moment you walk across that stage. Student loan. Here's a fun trick the federal loan system pulls on you. You graduate, you get your 6-month grace period where you don't have to make payments, and you think you're getting a break. You're not. Interest is still accruing the entire time, and when that grace period ends, all that accumulated interest gets added to your principal balance. It's called interest capitalization, and it means your loan is bigger before you even start paying it off. You owe more than you borrowed without spending a single extra dollar, which is, not ideal. The numbers here are staggering. Federal student loan debt currently sits at $1.693 trillion spread across 42.8 million borrowers. The average federal loan balance is $39,547, and federal loans make up over 90% of all student loan debt in the country. The average bachelor's degree borrower at a public university walks away owing roughly $31,960, and 10% of federal student loans were delinquent as of late 2025, 1 in 10. Private loans sit at around 1.62% delinquency, but private loans are a fraction of the total picture. Here's where it gets complicated. Everyone has an opinion on student debt forgiveness, and nobody agrees. One side says the system is fundamentally broken, that tuition has inflated beyond any reasonable return on investment, and that forgiving debt is the only humane response. The other side says forgiveness doesn't fix anything, that it rewards poor decision-making while ignoring the root cause, which is that universities keep raising prices because they know the government will keep writing checks. Both sides have a point. Neither side has a solution that actually addresses why a state school degree costs more than a house did 40 years ago, but at least student loans have fixed terms and government protections. Car loans, those come with a depreciating asset and a whole different set of problems. Car loan. Here's the thing about car loans. On paper, they look completely reasonable. New auto loan rates start as low as 3.89% APR for a 36-month term. Used cars, 4.79%. Those are numbers that make financial sense. But nobody's getting a 36-month loan anymore because nobody wants to pay $850 a month for a Camry. So dealerships stretch the term, 72 months. 84 months. Some lenders will go up to 96 months. And suddenly that 3.89% becomes 7%, and you're financing a car for longer than most people keep a car. A $30,000 loan at 5% APR over 84 months costs you roughly $5,600 in interest. That's enough to buy a separate functional vehicle. But the interest isn't even the real problem. The real problem is depreciation. A new car loses 20% of its value the moment you drive it off the lot. Meanwhile, your loan balance barely moves for the first 3 years because most of your payment is going toward interest. You're upside down for years. If you get in an accident, if you need to sell, you're trapped. You owe $22,000 on something worth $15,000. Dealerships push 84-month terms because $425 a month sounds way better than $850 a month. The monthly payment looks affordable. The total cost is horrifying. It's a sales tactic dressed up as a favor, and millions of people fall for it every single year. But at least a car loan has a ceiling. Navy Federal won't charge you more than 18% APR on an auto loan, which sounds high until you hear what payday lenders charge, because those numbers genuinely don't seem legal. Payday loans. Here's a fun math problem for you. You borrow $300 for 2 weeks. The lender charges you $15 per 100 borrowed, so that's a $45 fee. Doesn't sound terrible, right? Sounds like buying yourself some time for less than the cost of a nice dinner. Now annualize that fee. That $45 on a 2-week loan translates to an APR of nearly 400%. For context, even the worst credit cards top out around 30. Payday loans make credit card debt look like a responsible financial decision, which is genuinely impressive in the worst possible way. But the fee isn't even the real problem. The real problem is what happens on day 14 when that loan comes due. Over 80% of payday loans are rolled over or followed by another loan within 14 days. You couldn't pay back $300 2 weeks ago, and now you owe $345, so you roll it over. Another $45 fee, roll it again, another $45, 4 rollovers deep, and you've paid $180 in fees on a $300 loan. And you still owe the original $300. That's not a loan. That's a subscription to being broke. The amounts are small by design, usually $500 or less. The Military Lending Act specifically caps APR at 36% for active duty service members, which tells you everything you need to know. The government looked at payday loans and said we need to protect our troops from this. Now here's where it gets complicated. Critics call these predatory, and the numbers support that. But supporters argue they provide vital liquidity for communities that traditional banks won't serve. People with no credit, no savings, no access to a 12% personal loan. For them, 400% APR might genuinely be better than an eviction notice or losing their car. That doesn't make it good. It makes it the least terrible option in a system that's already failed them. But if payday loans use your paycheck as collateral, wait until you hear about the type of debt that uses your entire house. HELOC. A HELOC sounds like free money. You've got equity in your home, the bank lets you borrow against it, and for the first 10 years, you're only paying interest. What could possibly go wrong? Here's the thing. A HELOC is basically a credit card secured by your house. The national average interest rate sits at 7.43%, with some borrowers paying as high as 11.80% depending on their credit profile, but the rate isn't even the dangerous part. The dangerous part is the structure. HELOCs operate in 2 phases. Phase 1 is the draw period, typically 10 years, where you can borrow freely and only pay interest on what you've used. Phase 2 is the repayment period, another 20 years, where you're suddenly paying both principal and interest, and nobody warns you about the whiplash. Let's say you got a $50,000 balance at 7.43%. During the draw period, you're paying roughly $309 a month, feels manageable, feels like you've got this under control. Then the draw period ends and that payment jumps to around $470. That's a 52% increase hitting your monthly budget with zero warning if you weren't paying attention to the fine print. Financial advisors can't even agree on whether these things are helpful or harmful. Used strategically for home improvements that increase property value, a HELOC can genuinely make you money. Used to fund a vacation or consolidate credit card debt you're going to rack up again anyway, you've just converted unsecured debt into secured debt, backed by your house. Which is, not ideal. The fundamental tension is this: your home equity is simultaneously your greatest financial asset and the easiest thing to accidentally gamble away. And a HELOC hands you the chips whether you're ready for the table or not. But if the HELOC feels like a wolf in sheep's clothing, wait until you see what personal loans do with their no collateral required pitch. Personal loan. Here's what nobody tells you about personal loans. The average interest rate is 12.28%, which sounds reasonable until you realize that number is basically meaningless for most people. If you have excellent credit, you're looking at rates as low as 6.20%. If you don't, well, good luck, but the interest rate isn't even the real problem. The real problem is the origination fee, and most people don't understand how it actually works. Let me explain. Say you take out a $10,000 personal loan with a 5% origination fee. You'd think you pay that fee separately, like a processing charge. You don't. The lender deducts it upfront from your disbursement, so you receive $9,500 in your account, but you're repaying $10,000 plus interest. You're paying interest on money you never actually received, which is, not ideal. These fees range from under 1% to 8% depending on the lender, and they inflate your effective APR by anywhere from 0.5% to over a full percentage point. Lenders know most borrowers won't do that math. Now, where you borrow matters. Credit unions offer the lowest average rates at around 10.72%, with a legal cap at 18% for federal institutions. Online lenders advertise rates starting at 6.20%, but their maximums can hit 36%. Here's where the real debate starts. Personal loans are constantly marketed as debt consolidation tools. Roll all your credit card balances into one fixed payment at a lower rate. Sounds smart, and mathematically, it can be. But here's the thing, if someone consolidates $15,000 in credit card debt into a personal loan and then keeps spending on those now empty credit cards, they haven't solved anything. They've doubled their problem while feeling like they fixed it. The loan itself isn't the issue. The behavior that created the need for the loan is. But personal debt is one thing. When businesses start borrowing, the numbers get bigger, the products get weirder, and the potential for disaster scales it up dramatically. Business debt. Here's where debt stops being personal and starts being existential. Because when you borrow money for your business, you're not just gambling with your credit score, you're gambling with your livelihood, your employees' paychecks, and potentially your house if you signed a personal guarantee. Which you probably did. Traditional bank business loans aren't terrible. Interest rates range from 6.8% to 11%, manageable. SBA loans sit between 9.75% and 14.75%, steeper but sane. Equipment financing runs 4% to 45% APR. These all make sense. But then there's the merchant cash advance. Pay attention here because this is where business financing turns genuinely unhinged. Merchant cash advances don't use APR. They use a factor rate, typically between 1.1 and 1.5. Sounds innocent. It's not. You take a $10,000 advance at a 1.3 factor rate. You now owe $13,000. Period. Doesn't matter if you pay it back in 3 months or 12, you owe 13 grand. The faster you pay it back, the worse it is, because that $3,000 cost compressed into a shorter time frame inflates your effective APR into the stratosphere. We're talking 40% on the low end, 350% on the high end. The reason these exist is because they're technically not loans. They're purchasing your future revenue at a discount, which is a fancy way of saying we're going to take a percentage of every sale you make until we get our money back, plus a whole lot extra. Just a daily cut of your revenue until the balance hits zero. The structure is deliberately opaque. A 1.3 multiplier doesn't trigger the same alarm bells as your effective APR is 200%, even though they mean the same thing. And that's not an accident. The terminology exists specifically to prevent you from comparing costs across products. You can't easily tell who's offering a lifeline and who's handing you a financial noose dressed up as an opportunity. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.